Magandang hapon sa inyong lahat. We're back here at Umpukan with Nayong Pilipino and Tuklas Pilipinas. And we have a great discussion this afternoon on telling a heritage story. So, dalawang parts po ito. So, one will be happening, of course, this afternoon and one on Friday. So, we hope that you'll tune in until then. But before we start, we're joined here by members of Nayong Pilipino to give us a background about Umpukan. Miss Dr. Daya Bocarin. Hello, good afternoon.
Good afternoon. Thank you, Kate. So I think the best way to introduce what Umpukan is, we brought it up before, the history of how Umpukan came to be. I think this time we'll focus on the programs. No? So Umpukan sa Nayon is really a series of multi-sectoral consultations for what we're trying to develop. And what are these? It's our 3 programs mainly. So our first program, we call it Heritage Space. The property in Manila Bay may not be built, the facility may not be built anytime soon because of the pandemic, but nevertheless, we want to continue engaging our audiences. And one way to do that is to engage audiences in digital platforms by having interactions. So it's like curating something, but for a digital platform. And then the other program that we have, we call it Knowledge Center. Knowledge Center is like the research institute of Nayong Pilipino. So it has research initiatives. We do research initiatives on cultural policy, sustainable heritage tourism, among many others. The Knowledge Center also has the collection of the Nayong Pilipino. Our collection, by the way, includes what was acquired by the Panaming before. So it might be of interest to anthropologists who are listening right now. So we also want to have suggestions regarding that. And I think we will have some virtual platforms also to show some of the collection later on when we are able to do the inventory. And then the third program that we have, we call it Cultural Leadership Institute. It's a training program for developing cultural leaders among employees of NPF, public servants, tourism officers, and the general public. So we're having this Umpukan to be able to identify what sort of course offerings should the Cultural Leader Institute have.
Thank you. Thank you, Laya. So I think we have a lot of things to look forward to with Nayong Filipino Foundation's programs. And actually, we're really thankful and glad that we have partnered with an organization who's really sincere in cultural heritage promotion in the country. So thank you so much for this. So this afternoon, actually, we're joined by 3 distinguished men and women in the cultural heritage sector. So itong talks natin about telling a heritage story, this is in the perspective of some of our heritage professionals and academics here in the country. And we hope that we can learn from there, and from there we can actually look for possible solutions, how we can collaborate and how we can adapt to some of the local issues that's happening around heritage. Okay, so actually, we can start now with our first speaker. So our first speaker will be talking about working with local communities and interpreting local heritage stories. So Sir Boboy Costas organized the Boho Aloginsan Ecotourism Association in Cebu and developed the River Eco Cultural Tour, which turned fishermen and their families into community tourism champions. It won actually 5 global awards in ecotourism. He has trained local communities, local governments, private companies, resorts, hotels, and tour operators on ecotourism and sustainable tourism strategies in sustainable tourism across the country and around the Asia Pacific region through his company Grassroots Travel. He sits as a board of director of Ecotourism for Eco Explorations and the Bangkok-based Asian Ecotourism Network. Actually, the Department of Tourism awarded him in the Philippine National Tourism Award in 2003, And in 2015, the University of San Carlos awarded him with the most outstanding alumnus in the field of community service. He was a university he was a student at the University of California, Berkeley Bears Environmental Leadership Fellow in 2016. And the same year, he was recognized by Philippine Airlines as one of the inspiring Filipinos. So without further ado, we welcome Sir Boboy Costas.
Hello, hello,
Hi, Sir Boboy.
hello. Yes, good afternoon, everyone. This afternoon, I'd like to talk about my on-the-ground experience working with local communities in interpreting local heritage stories. So let me start. Let me share my presentation. I'll start my presentation by introducing to you the organization I work with. It's called Grassroots Travel. Um, Grassroots Travel works with local communities, with local government units and private groups to develop community-based sustainable tourism and cultural tourism. So currently, I am working at Burawin. I have a project in Burawin Leyte. It's called the Mahagnaw Volcano Natural Park. It's one of the smallest protected areas in the Philippines with about 340 hectares. It has 3 lakes, which are actually, if you can see on the picture, those are actually old caldera of volcanoes. It has 2 ecosystems, terrestrial and wetland, numerous hot and cold springs. There are rivers and there are waterfalls outside, and one community inside the protected area. So you can see that's the photo of the Mahagnaw, the natural resources of Mahagnaw volcano. And we also have outstanding flora and fauna endemic to the area. And yes, we work with local communities. Last year, we trained residents in the stuff we usually do, cultural mapping, and we also incorporate the scientific foundation of biology and ecology in environmental science, so that it becomes relevant for them why they should protect and conserve their natural resources. And we also have cultural, the cultural side of it, the cultural mapping. Burauen is so rich in cultural resources. For example, you have their numerous sites, archaeological sites. There's an old fortress church by the river, and there are numerous artifacts that have been, retrieved by amateur diggers. So as you can see in the photo, you also have the interesting intangible and tangible heritage. No, yeah, you have the cuisine. You have because Burauen is in Leyte, so it played an important role in World War II, and it also has a very important personality in the person of Norberto Romualdez. So these are just some of the history and heritage of Burauen. And then in the past, I worked at the Nayon Bank, which is the only double barrier reef in the Philippines. It's a very rare geological formation. In fact, it's one of the only 6 double barrier reefs in the world. So it runs for about 156 kilometers in the Central Visayas with 40 islands. And I work in the communities in one particular island. It's called Cabgan Island. It's called Cabgan because of the roosting site for bats. In local dialect, it's called Kabug. So again, we train the local communities there, both natural and cultural resources, identification and mapping and assessment, from cuisine to tangible heritage to natural heritage, even to architecture, local vernacular architecture. So these are some of the photos. They also have a mangrove there, cuisine, seafood, which is Tubigon is very famous for. And then in 2015, I was involved in a project in collaboration with Smart Communication. We did a community-based digital tourism in Boljoon, Cebu. As we all know, Boljoon is one of the picturesque towns in Cebu. It has a fortress church, which the construction started in 1783 and comprises a defense system of watchtowers and blockhouses. So I worked with the community there, again, mapping and assessing natural and cultural heritage. The output was actually a digital tourism. It was actually a product with a digital tourism component. You have to scan the structure, and then comes the narrative of the artifact, or through the use of QR codes. And then I also worked with, in 2009, I started working with the Aluginsan community in Boho River in Aluginsan. As we all know, Aluginsan is on the Midwest part of the town. It's a river. In fact, there are two rivers crossing along the town. And then you have a very beautiful beach just on the side of the river. And the river flows into Nayon Strait, which is one of the biggest, no, not one of the biggest, it's the biggest marine protected area in the Philippines. So there you have it. That's the beach. And then you have the river. And then you have the community complex. So you see, Boho River is also very rich in natural resources. They have like a mangrove forest. And then they have marine mammals, because it's along the Nayon Strait, whale sharks, and then lots of birds, especially in the mangrove areas. So in all of these projects, there are two tools I usually use at the outset. And these are, number one is, I call it the participatory rapid assessment, where we, together with local communities plus representatives from the academe, we assess the condition, the present condition of the natural resource. So those are some of the photos. And then we also do cultural mapping to map the important and relevant cultural heritage, and prioritize their values and meaning to the community. So Boho Aluginsan, I'll dwell on this project. Boho Aluginsan has a traditional creative industry. It's mat weaving. And when we did the cultural mapping, we found out that there are a lot of forgotten traditional culinary traditions, which the community forgot, but which the generations before them cooked and prepared. They also have a ritual, palina, before the fishermen sail their boats down the river. The medicine man would usually come and bless them, to bless the nets, bless the fishing boats, to ward off evil spirits. And they also value their important landmarks, the rocks, which is very meaningful to them, especially to their ancestors. The rocks, and then ancient places where their ancestors or their parents hid during World War II, and even a cathedral door-like formation on the face of a rock wall. And Aludinsan also has a very important landmark. It has an 18th century baluarte, which saw restoration in 2011, I think that was 2011, and which is now a venue for events, especially community events that has something to do with arts. So after we did the participatory rapid assessment and the cultural mapping, the two tools, we presented the data back to the community for the community to validate them and assess and give value to them. And then after that, we incorporated them into our interpretation. We did interpretation planning, and then we incorporated them into the narratives of the locals. So we used the generated data in a lot of ways, which I will show later. So these are some of our guides. Our guides, they're all actually fishermen, sons and daughters, mother and son, siblings, no? And they interpret for the local community and their heritage the narrative, no, of the community to the guests or to the visitors who go to the river for a river cruise. So that's interpretation. They usually tell stories about the importance of mangroves, for example, how to make puso, all that sort of thing. Or down the river, they tell stories along the way. So because it has a creative industry, they also do mat weaving demonstration to visitors every tour. And then they sing, they dance, and they narrate stories through songs. And they also perform another ritual by the beach. This time it's another ritual. It's an offering to the gods of the sea. And one of the strategies we use in order for these local guides or local interpreters to improve their skills is a continuing interpretation education for them. So going back, the two tools that are very relevant before we generate data are resource assessment, which is a resource survey or an inventory participated by the community with a local academe assisting. In other words, it's local wisdom plus academic knowledge. So it usually applies to the natural heritage resources of the area. The other one is the cultural mapping, which is the process of identifying cultural heritage resources in a locality to establish its cultural significance and identity, or in other words, to map out the cultural heritage resources in the community. So what are the goals? In other words, both the tools are community building tool which catalyze development such as tourism, creative, cultural, and social activities, conservation management plan, for example, and even as our talk this afternoon emphasizes, interpretive planning. So the goals is really for development. In the context of tourism, these views introduce the issue of interpretation of the value. So in the context of tourism, it works by establishing what we call the sense of place, or by creating a sense of place. So between these natural resources, both natural and cultural, lies the linkage between the community's endeavor and the landscape or the environment surrounding them. So this linkage, combined with their tradition and activities, it creates a sense of place. Okay? So this sense of place is actually, it's more than simply a physical location when you say, no? This sense, which is, of course, developed over time, it is an expression of the attitude and personality at a community level, and it draws on the success and adversity of a community. It's, past and present failures, its, accomplishments, etc. And so it develops a sense of local identity. So the interpretation of values that will accurately reflect the sense of place needs to be carefully considered from the perspective of sensitivity to cultural ownership and intellectual and personal values. In other words, the sensitivity to cultural ownership and local interests must be taken into consideration so that it leads into community participation. So how does it work? So community participation is very important, because without community participation, you will not get the full support and goodwill of the community. In the context of tourism, for example, a tourism product based on the interpretation of a community's local heritage environment, complete with a diverse and special characteristics, is much more likely to be self-sustaining. Why? Because you have the community behind. The community will rally behind you. So community participation is very important to increase and enhance the effectiveness of interpretation. So this is just a diagram of the community organizing process. So if you look at the slide, you actually have about how many? About 10 phases in community organizing, the basics. So I would say that the two community tools should come in social investigation, and then in the issue identification and analysis. In the context of municipal tourism development plan, resource assessment comes in the issue identification and the baseline assessment, which we did in all of our projects. So the other tool I mentioned a while ago is cultural mapping, and with this, it's actually in the case of Aluginsan, we did it for a cultural corridor, the river from the source to the mouth, and then to the sea, to Tanyon Strait, and to another community, and then exit. So it forms a kind of a loop. It's a cultural corridor where you can really see all the cultural and heritage resources that are very important to the community, that they value, so that it offers a complete visitor experience, so that guests leave the place with meaningful and memorable experience. So when we did it, we did the primary data gathering, the two tools, for example, but then we complemented it with secondary data gathering, archival data and other documents. That, for example, history of Aluginsan, we got it from archival work. Scientific names, we actually, it was a two-way learning process, because the academe learned how flora and fauna are called in local names. At the same time, the community knew the scientific names through the academe. So it was an exchange of information. So what did we do with the data after? So the data formed part in a lot of documents, in a lot of multimedia. So it formed part in GIS, in maps, photos, video and audio recordings. Of course, this came after all data have been validated. So what happens next? So after the assessment and analysis, we did valuing and validation, what is very important to them, what kind of resources or what kind of cultural narrative they would like to highlight. And then we incorporated it into our tourism development plan, local, and then interpretation. So again, just to give you an overview, interpretation is the process of communicating to the visitors the meaning and significance of the place being visited. And interpretive planning, of course, you have it there. It's self-explanatory, but it's a process that blends management needs and resource consideration with visitor needs and desires to determine the most effective way to communicate the message to the intended or to the targeted audience. No? So when you plan, why do you want to interpret? Who should be involved? So these are the things you would ask yourself and the community. And then another definition of interpretation, which is my favorite, personal favorite. This is by Freeman Tilden. It's an educational activity which aims to reveal meanings and relationships, through the use of original objects, by first-hand experience, and by illustrative media, rather than simply to communicate factual information. So again, by the way, Tilden was an American journalist whose lifetime was spent on writing national parks. And I think if you look at this definition, it says that it's more than simply communicating factual information. It's actually, interpretation is revelation. No? So interpretation may have different roles. No, it can be an educational tool. It can be it includes an entertainment factor. And in the case of the Aloginsan community, as well as the other communities I've worked with, it's a useful tool for meeting conservation and sustainable development objectives through visitor management, promoting cultural heritage preservation, changing attitudes and values, and not only the values and attitudes of the host communities, but also the more important one is, changing the attitudes and values of the visitors. No? So what are the principles of interpretation? So it should be meaningful to the audience. It should provoke curiosity, attention, and interest, and educate. So any interpretation that does not somehow relate what is being displayed or described to something within the personality or experience of the visitor is sterile, according to Tilden. So it doesn't count, no? So interpretive audience are actually captive audience because, number one, they are participating of their own free will. They go to the destination themselves in their own free time. They want to see something in a new way, and they are seeking inspiration and recreation. So again, principles of interpretation, as I've mentioned in my previous slide, information is only a part of the interpretation. Interpretation is revelation based upon information. And take note that they are entirely different things. However, all interpretation includes information because you cannot interpret if it is not, if it doesn't come from factual information. An interpretation contains many forms of art. It can be scientific, the materials. It can be historical or architectural. Or it should also stimulate, it should provoke, and it should inspire. How? Of course, by being relevant and interactive. It satisfies visitor curiosity so that once they leave the destination, it creates a memorable, meaningful experience and behavioral change. It creates meaning, it provides entertainment, and it provokes the whys, and it provokes questions. So interpretation has techniques. The techniques used should be used to communicate the ideas and feelings. It should encompass all learning styles and all media, and it should help the message to provoke change if necessary. So it can be interactive, it can be a lecture, it can be a talk, it can be a drama, print, self-guiding exhibits, it can be visitor centers, it can be museums, etc. Okay, so 2 more slides. So based on my groundwork experience, there are interpretation issues we have currently facing, especially in the Asia Pacific region. So there's cultural differences, both consumers and producers, because of different ethnicities and nationalities. The media, interpretive media and signs are printed and produced only in one language, and by and large, usually the language of the destination, which leads to service quality. It reduces visitor satisfaction, and then with that, the destination loses out because of the visitors failing to understand the cultural or heritage significance. So what I'm actually recommending for interpretation, especially in these times, is we should digitally empower our local communities. Online trainings must be conducted. This is to develop their digital skills relevant to the new normal post-COVID. So this will include developing virtual experiences of places off the beaten path, or maybe, as I've mentioned earlier, lost traditions. They can do social media live interviews with hosts in rural destinations, sharing their stories across the globe, or virtual travel to destinations with host communities, or they can actually do all of these things simultaneously, but the problem should be answered first, and this is the connectivity issue. So connectivity infrastructure must be in place, no? And if you look at the knowledge product, if you look at Aloginsan, for example, if you look at the design of our tour, the tour designs are what do you call this? It's a loop, but there's only one entrance and one exit. You don't have to repeat the whole route. You have to take another exit when you end the tour. This is so because we want to give the visitor, awesome, no? And wonderful experience that is not repetitive. So I think that ends my presentation. So I hope it was clear to you. Thank you very much, and good afternoon once again.
Thank you, Sir Boboy. That was an interesting presentation, and I'm sure that a lot of our viewers are taking notes of his tips and from his approaches. But I think we also have a lot of questions given all the ang ganda kasi nung mga methods and approaches that they have been doing in his projects. So it would be nice to discuss that later on.
Okay.
All right. Sige. So we'll just move forward with our speakers, and then later we'll take in some questions from the audience as well. Okay. So for our next speaker, she will talk about finding ourselves through stories of the past. Historian by training, Cara Garilao holds a master's degree in heritage conservation from the University of Sydney. Over the past decade, she has been managing the community-based heritage tourism program of Fundación Santiago, working hand-in-hand with local heritage stakeholders in Calabarzon to develop and execute interpretative activities. She's also the consultant and trustee of CARD-MRI EHO Tours, an in-house heritage and tourism program that seeks to make history relevant and meaningful to the institution's partners and clients across the Philippines. Before returning to the Philippines, Cara was a heritage consultant with Graham Books and Associates in Australia, and she authored numerous conservation management plans and heritage impact assessments and heritage assessments. So here we are with Ms. Cara Garilao.
Thank you, Kate. Thank you, Tuklas, and thank you, Nayong Pilipino, for inviting me. Thank you, Sir Boboy, for your presentation. I also took down notes. I also have some questions. So I will just share my screen. So my presentation's a bit different. I just thought I would share 2 case studies. As Kate mentioned earlier, I'm really a historian, and I think that really informs the way I've been approaching interpretation for the past 10 years. As a historian, I really feel that, the present, whether we like it or not, is influenced by our past. And if we want to make a choice about the kind of future we want to have, then we need all the data we can get. from the past and the present, because most probably the decision we are about to make has already been made in the past, and rightly or wrongly, I'm not sure how it unfolded. But because of that, as a trained historian, I think heritage sites are our most tangible links to the past. I think Sir Boboy mentioned, that you have panels, but sometimes these are in one language. And how many Filipinos really can say that they love to read? Okay, so if they don't really love to read, then perhaps the old plaza, the old building, is their first link to history. And heritage sites have much to teach us if we recognize that these sites have multiple layers of meaning and significance. And if we are equipped to read these stories in the buildings. So our understanding of buildings and their importance come from the stories we hear or the stories we don't hear about such places. So my work is, I'm heavily influenced by Freeman Tilden as well. It's good that Boboy already mentioned him, but also by the writings of Lisa Brochu, an American interpreter, and Sam Ham, who basically gave the TOR framework, that interpretation had to be thematic, organized, relevant, and entertaining, so as to provoke people into action. There has to be an outcome, an action from your interpretive activity. And I think I'd also like to take this opportunity to stress that interpretation should be considered an integral part of the conservation process. Sometimes when we think about conservation, we just think about that it ends once the walls have been restored and the wall is no longer leaning. But I think that if we want people to really be stewards of their heritage, then we have to be part of that process of fostering personal connections, that process of helping them find meaning in sites that perhaps they never had any associations with, or with buildings that have quite negative negative associations. Okay, so that's basically the theory of where I'm coming from, and there are many ways to do interpretation, as has been mentioned already. But I'd like to present two examples. And this is an interactive activity. So if you can unmute your mics, mabilis lang, okay, to illustrate my point. Okay. Ayan. Okay. So I think some of you might be familiar with this building. I would just like to know what adjectives or thoughts come to mind when you see this.
Kara, ano ulit yung tanong? Like, what comes to our mind?
Yeah, what adjectives or things come to mind? Yeah, for a stream of consciousness. Don't edit yourself.
Ako inisip ko, clean history.
Clean history. Okay, all right, great. That's perfect. Okay, next. Anyone else?
Can I answer?
Yes, of course.
Yes,
please.
Raya.
What comes to mind?
Yeah.
Elite, provincial gentry.
Okay.
Wow.
See, I love this. Okay, clean history, provincial gentry. Anything else?
Si Sir Boboy.
Yes, we need
Can you repeat the
somebody.
question again? I'm lost.
What comes to mind when you see this house? So what adjectives, words, or thoughts? Don't edit yourself.
Okay. Old wealth.
Okay, old wealth. All right. Okay. How about when you see this guy? Don't edit yourself. Okay. What comes to mind when you see this guy?
Joke lang.
Don't edit yourself.
Can you hear me now? Am I heard
Yes,
now?
yes.
Yes,
I said,
go.
sorry, I said taksil.
Okay, sure, Taksil. Okay. Great. Anything else?
Old.
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 Okay.
Bigger than the
Tasha-
man himself.
I'm sorry, what was that?
Bigger than the man himself.
Bigger than the man himself. Okay. Anything else? Does anybody want to add?
Can I answer?
Of
Yes.
course.
Vested interests.
Vested
my.
interest.
Wow.
Oh, okay. Vested interest. And no, wala nang dagdag. Okay. Tasha, did you want to add anything for the house? For this?
I was going to say at first colonial.
Colonial.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. So thank you very much. Okay. So this guy really has a humongous problem. And I'm not here to defend him. Okay. In fact, what you've said, mga taksil, vested interest, bigger than himself, old. I mean, sometimes we've heard people say, siya yung makasarili. Okay? Siya ang nagpapatay kay Bonifacio and Luna. And sometimes you have people who don't want to go to his home, to this NHCP site. Because it's associated with this clean history. Okay, a lot of conflicting attitudes and feelings are being arisen, and so this is not unique. I think it's important that we recognize when we talk about heritage, everyone will come with their own perspectives, their own feelings towards a certain site. And I think as heritage practitioners, I mean, our job is to preserve heritage, and one way of doing it is to get people to rethink and to find personal meanings and values to something or someone that they probably would rather see dead. Okay, so what we did, this is just one program that we did. It's a first-person interpretation program launched in 2019, and I was very fortunate enough to have the opportunity to work with the Museo ni Emilio Aguinaldo, Cavite El Viejo Heritage Tourism Association, a group of local volunteers, and the NHCP to create a first-person activity in an NHCP site. And I think based on our conversations with the NHCP, it was their first time to basically do something like this. So what exactly is first-person interpretation? It's also known as live history in the United States. But basically what we did was to bring to life 3 characters from history. The first is the mother of Emilio Aguinaldo, Doña Teneng. The second was a veteran of the Philippine Revolution of 1896. He was a composite character. And the second was the third was a helper living in the house, based also on a composite character. Now, how does it basically work? So remember, it's all about creating meaning, creating value. So each character delivers a monologue that highlights a particular period in the life of Aguinaldo. So everyone knows him as either the traitor or the first, but he had basically a life before all of that. And what was it? Was he really destined to be the president? Was he destined to be a leader of the revolution? So she delivers a monologue, and you will notice that she's actually outside the house. And the reason for this is because the house itself is a 4th character. in this whole program. So she is outside because the house itself, as it stands today, did not exist, but the property was already there, and the family was already living there. And in 1886, he was just, I think, about going 17 years old. Okay, so her entire monologue is about the life before the before he ends before the revolution. um After each monologue, the audience has the opportunity to ask questions, and it's a no holds barred situation. They can ask Teneng anything about her son, for as long as it does not go beyond the year 1886. And it's quite interesting what kind of questions come up, because kids ask things like, what kind of games did he play? Mothers give comments like, I think, Teneng, you are a very domineering woman. Okay, so they're trying to find a connection now to this character of our president. The tour then moves on inside the house, and this is the year, quote unquote, 1920. Reason being, the year 1919, 1920 was roughly the time the house took on its present form. And here we are in Veterans Hall, because this was literally where Aguinaldo met with veterans of the Revolution and the Philippine-American War. And we always stress to our guests that, your buttocks are sitting on the same benches that buttocks of revolutionaries also sat in. And here we have a veteran who recounts his experience of the revolution, what it was like to fight on the front line, what Aguinaldo was like as a leader from his point of view. And there's a reason why he is there. So by this time, Aguinaldo's in his 50s, is about 50 years old, is in his 50s. And there's a reason why our veteran is in the house at that particular time, and the guests are journeying with him. And finally, okay, this is also a very special moment, because the main living room of the Aguinaldo Shrine is actually closed to visitors. You can't just sit anywhere you want, but we were very lucky that the NHCP trusted us to allow visitors to actually sit, to go beyond the metal chain, and to sit and to really be in a space where your helper, a helper in 1939, talks about Aguinaldo as a senior citizen. Okay, what was he doing when he was 70 years old? And how was this space used? So what we are trying to do is to show the evolution of a person, a very controversial person, as well as an evolution of space. And by the guests using the space in a different way, hopefully they are also able to reflect on how spaces change over time. So the overall, it's really about presenting monologues that encourage people to really question current realities, I guess you could say, and whether if they were in that time, 1886, would they have behaved differently? Our monologues, because of the question and answer, the monologues only take 10 minutes. But sometimes the question and answer and discussion between the character and the audience can last 20 minutes, double. And it's because there's no holds barred. You get the really interesting questions from children. So I remember one time there was I think he was 12 years old, and he asked our veteran, kung kung may anak ka ngayon at may gera na naman, papayagan mo ba yung anak mo na sumama sa digmaan? Okay, and so to get a kid, to actually think about that, or for another kid who asked you, if you had a choice, sasali ka ba talaga? Okay, and you kind of wonder, are these the same questions that come up in a classroom, or is this something that because you're in a different space, in a different way of presenting history, it becomes more engaging? So we have, at the end of each program, we do facilitate a closing, and we try to address issues like, why should houses be preserved? And would it mean anything if it was lost to me? And we always ask these people, just because independence was declared here, if it was demolished, would it matter to you? And I think for a lot of people, it's really the first time that they start thinking about these things. So that's the program, and I'm almost done, but I just wanted to illustrate that thoughtful interpretation applies not only in museums and or to those involved in the heritage industry or in the tourism industry, but I think it can also apply to institutions that want to create meaningful change within their communities. Okay, because it's really about values, it's about transformation. I mean, interpretation, you want a change at the end of your activity. So I just want to share this work that we're doing with CARD MRI. So if those who are not familiar, CARD is actually the largest microfinance institution in the Philippines. They have about 6 million members, from all the way up north to all the way down south. And I got involved with them several years ago because their founder, Dr. Aris Alip, they have an in-house educational program for their clients and staff. And in the past now, they used to go to Boracay and other beach experiences. And one time he asked, "What did you learn?" And I don't know if he asked the wrong person or a very honest person, but the person said, "I learned nothing." So what he did was he decided that it was important that Filipinos, especially those who probably do not have the opportunity to learn about history, about culture, to get informed, to get educated. And so we launched the EHOS tours, and I got involved with them to develop their in-house cultural heritage education program that basically links local history narratives with the experiences and history of CARD as an institution, because it's been around for more than 25 years. And it's not always easy, okay? Because, is anybody familiar with this place? Anyone? I'll give you a clue. It's what are those things in the background? Anyone? Yes, I can read your lips. Those are bells. Yeah. So actually, these
In Samar?
Yes. Okay. Yes.
Balangiga bells.
The Balangiga bells.
Okay.
Yes. So I think the question is parang what does a microfinance institution that is based in San Pablo, Laguna, what does their history have to do with the history of Balangiga that separates them for 120 years? Okay. On the surface, perhaps not much, but when you apply the principles of Samham, make it thematic, make it organized, make it relevant, then you look at the bigger picture. So when you look at contemporary history of the area, looking at the experiences of Yolanda, when you look at modern history, the Second World War, or the Spanish, the pre-Hispanic period and archaeology and the crafts, then you're able to really create a theme. You will find that the theme is what will connect all of this. So even though you're separated by thousands of miles, by language, by culture, and by time, you can find that Balangiga will matter to someone working in microfinance in the 21st century. And we were very fortunate that we have rolled this program out in different parts of the country: Baguio, Davao, Iloilo, and of course, San Pablo. And when COVID is over, I will invite you all to maybe join us, because it is a different take on history. It's a different take on the environment. And I think if you come with us, you will be able to have it's not the usual narratives. So I guess in summary, what I just want to close with is that at the end of the day, when we talk about heritage, it's really a heritage for what and for why. Why are we doing this? Okay, a lot of people say pride of place, which I totally agree with. But I think we also now have to go to the next level. Pride of place for what? Is it really for civic engagement? Are we doing this for social cohesion? Are we doing this because we want to really think about what it means to be a Filipino? And I think part of it is recognizing that perhaps being Filipinos, yes, we are different, okay, but we also have certain similarities amongst ourselves. So I think most of the interpretation that has been done focuses a lot on difference rather than on similarities as well, which actually I think works to the detriment of our effort. So I think it's also worthwhile to think about what values are we really espousing with the stories that we tell or we choose to tell each other. Okay, if our stories are always about the rich families, okay, or the elites or the old men, okay, then what kind of values are we espousing, and does this really help us move forward as a nation? Are we really willing to discuss the difficult aspects of our history as represented in these heritage sites, or do we just want to focus on the good stuff? So I guess that's the reason why I chose the title, because as interpreter, if we want people to preserve our heritage, it needs to be relevant to them. But ultimately, I think heritage must help us confront who we are as a people, so we can consciously create a future that we want. So that's it. Thank you.
May clapping talaga tayo, Tasha.
Nag-clap din ako.
Okay. Yeah, thank you so much for that, Kara. I think sobra niyang relevant in this time because heritage is not just the past. It's actually what we make of it currently and probably in the future. Like, how is it really relevant? Kaya maganda yung talk ni Kara. And then later we'll get back to more of that. Yeah. Okay. So to wrap up our speaking engagements for this afternoon, we have Miss Natasha Quintanar on spreading archaeological awareness in her work in Pinagbayanan in Batangas. She's also a graduate of history from the University of the Philippines, Diliman, and from the same university, she also graduated Masters of Archaeology. She was a high school teacher for history and literature for 3 years and undergraduate lecturer for humanities and social science courses in different tertiary level campuses in UP Diliman included. She is also a member of Dakila as part of the campaigns team, where she used to be the director. She also co-founded an NGO with her colleagues called Tuklas Pilipinas, which aims to spread heritage and cultural consciousness in the Philippines through alternative education. So as part of her public history and archaeology advocacy, she wrote children's book in the Bayani biographies, Gregoria de Jesus. She is in the process of writing another contribution to this series on the life of Teresa Magbanwa. Yeah, so check that out. Bayani Biographies is a series of children's books written by young historians for young readers. And currently, Natasha is finishing, right, her PhD in archaeological heritage at the University of Tübingen in Germany. So, Tasha, take it away.
Thank you for that introduction, Kate. Finishing, finishing. That's yan yung ano natin. Okay, let me share my screen. Wait, there we go. Can you see it?
Yeah.
Yes? Okay, cool. There. Okay. So the title is Spreading Archaeological Awareness in Pinagbayanan, San Juan, Batangas. I actually did this project with other Tuklas members, Dr. Grace Barreto Tesoro, June Obille of NISMED UP, Taj Vitales, and Lala Shoko. So for those wondering, that's the location of San Juan, Batangas. And we wrote this paper, and it's actually published. I'll share with you later. So what we did was we made a module for the general public that was to be up, and then the module was applied as a workshop in San Juan, Batangas. So we merged ideas from other disciplines like personal interpretation, as what Sir Boboy and Kara have been sharing, heritage interpretation to cater to people who do not have an archaeology or heritage background. So at that time, in 2018, we were hoping to perfect this module and use it for other local communities that have rich archaeological heritage. And the project was actually a joint project between Tuklas, the UPASP or Archaeological Studies Program, through the extension grant from the Office of the Extension Coordination of UP. And it's also part of my PhD thesis through the Lisa Maskell Fellowship's Gerda Henkel Foundation. So just to share, this is Tuklas. It's a nonprofit organization that aims to spread awareness of archaeological heritage in the Philippines. And part of our goals is to empower local communities to manage and protect their own heritage, use knowledge from archaeology to cultivate heritage-oriented community services, and instill pride of place, ayan, as mentioned also by our two speakers. So what prompted this, no? A series of excavations were done in Pinagbayanan from 2009 until 2012. Years of working in the area inspired us to keep in contact with the community. Since the town has a lot of potential, we wanted the community to benefit from our research. The area is rich with built heritage and other archaeological findings. Currently, there are local groups that are enthusiastic about it. These groups visit the built heritage sites. However, tours do not cater to the local community or residents. Para siyang mas geared towards other tourists. And the spiels during tours are still meant for foreign tourists, and they do not include important information that the archaeological excavations have yielded through the years. So what we did was we made sure that through the logistical process, we made sure that we contacted local businesses and the local heritage group. We involved small business owners in, for example, in catering to the food. We worked with local government employees and officials, and the San Juan Batangas Bulbok Heritage Group. And we also spoke to the barangay LGU. So, after the planning and logistics, it took us a long time to actually make the module because heritage interpretation isn't really popular amongst academic archaeologists. So it was a challenge even for us to create an interpretative module for our participants. So I just want to share with you how we went through this. So the challenge was how to turn the archaeological data into experiences, which is one of the principles of heritage interpretation. We turn scientific or historical data into meaningful experiences. So to create deeper meaning by making facts or just data meaningful and instill the respect for the spirit of place. So this is where heritage or personal interpretation comes in. The challenge was how to engage participants, because normally when we start talking about how an archaeological process happens, it gets tedious and too technical. So we wanted our participants to also understand that this is the tedious part of archaeology, but it can also be fun. So we wanted discovery learning. And so we made sure that most of the activities were very hands-on and more than just a question and answer and a lecture portion. It was more of asking for inferences from their observations. Okay, so to start the execution, we wanted to also show our participants how archaeologists do our research and then how we interpret that data. So step one, we started with objects. We first asked participants, actually it was a homework, like before arriving and before the beginning of the workshop, like days prior, we sent a letter or where we sent guidelines to our participants and we told them to bring heritage materials from their family or heirloom pieces. So in this photo, the participant is holding an old gardener's scissors, and she was sharing to her group mates the story behind the gardening scissors. In the end, she learned that, and what her exact words were, I'm going to speak in Tagalog, matagal ko nang nakikita ang malaking gunting na to sa bahay namin. Pero hindi ko siya pinapansin kasi nga kalawang na siya. It was old and rusty and it was just an old gardening scissors. When she asked her mother about it, she finally learned that her great-grandfather was one of the first gardeners in San Juan, Batangas, and the community actually relied on him. They hired him to garden their gardens. So he was, and then it gave her a sense of pride, saying that hindi ko alam yung kwento na to tungkol sa great-grandfather ko. Hindi ko alam na may contribution pala siyang ganito sa komunidad ng San Juan. And now she actually wants to clean and preserve those pairs of scissors. And then after the participants shared their heirloom pieces, we allowed them to view, not really touch, the actual artifacts that we were able to retrieve from excavations in 2009 until 2012. We brought the artifacts, and then we let the participants look at the artifacts, and we told them that your heirloom pieces have very interesting family stories connected to them, and just as artifacts have stories to it, you also give meaning, and value. So napaintindi namin sa kanila na this is why artifacts are important. Besides the scientific process that it goes through for us to learn, technical data that could help our archaeological interpretation, there are stories just like yours. And then we also brought them to the site. So we started with kagamitan or object, and then we brought them to the kapaligiran or the environment or excavation site so that they get the feel of the place. You see these old pillars. So those are 19th century pillars or columns that used to be part of the structure that was there. And in 2011, we excavated. Of course, you don't see it now because we backfill it, but there was a total excavation of this site. And we learned about, we actually found an adobe flooring. We were able to infer the different parts of the structure or of the house with the help of architects. And so we brought them there so that participants are able to understand the relationship of the environment and the landscape on the structures and the settlement building. So the site visit was for them to get the feel of the place. And then we gave them like a floor plan that they could answer themselves, like for them to just kind of imagine. And then sila na yung bahala to answer, oh, this could have been the kitchen or this could have been the main entrance. Then part of the interpretation part or part of the more than just a lecture part is we kind of used their kinetic energy in it, meaning we through human activity that is dependent on their surroundings, they acted out what they think is instead of just answering, we ask them to act out what they think is being done in a certain room and or what is being done in a certain part of the structure. Also, we try to explain river settlements to them. And so I think this is a fishing net. They're showing us that what happens in some river settlements is fishing. So may activity na nangyayari. And here are other examples of the activities. And then next is when after having explained the kagamitan or the object, and after having explained the importance of the kapaligiran or the environment, we explain to them how we as archaeologists are able to build a narrative or kung paano namin nabubuo ang isang kwento or story of history. And we always tell them that ang kasama sa mga kwentong ito, ang mga stories or even folklore that locals or community members may have had. And to get them to execute this, because it was a 2-day workshop, we asked our participants to gather stories from their family members or from the eldest member of their community on stories of the houses beside them or stories of San Juan, ganyan. So we let them also experience what we as archaeologists do as well in the field. And we really do approach locals or community members and ask them for stories that they may have. So here, they learn the importance of research and mixing this with local history from residents. And then next, we show them how we do archaeology. As you see in the photo, we call that shoebox archaeology. for them to understand the process of an excavation. Honestly, we usually do a sandbox archaeology, but because we didn't have, I mean, the budget was small, we made do with what we could bring, and these were shoe boxes. And then we printed and laminated photos of artifacts that we found in the site, so that they could feel also that so this is how meticulous archaeology is. And then we also taught them how to measure and how to document their excavation. And then after all of that, so we showed them object, environment, excavation site, and how to excavate. We later explained to them kahalagahan or significance. So the question was, now that you know all of this, and now that you know that this is the process, what is the importance of studying and preserving heritage? And so we got feedback, like, of course, we asked them to give feedback, no, and ask questions. So for them, the workshop allowed the participants to experience how archaeologists work. They liked the experiential and the collaborative approaches. And they realized that archaeology can be painstaking, but the information we get is beneficial to us. And other reactions that participants gave us was when they learned more about the ruins or the structure where we took them, some of the youth answered that they just used to play there, or para sa kanila, dyan kami nagtataguan. We used to play hide and seek there when we were kids, or we didn't realize that those pillars or those columns were actually part of a 19th century house. And one of my favorite reactions from the participants was that San Juan, Batangas has actually more to offer than its white sandy beaches. And they really appreciate that meron pala silang prehistory and history, and which they learned through the workshop. So what we learned also as the facilitators, that when we do a process that actually involves the activity, kumbaga yung kikilos talaga yung mga participants, and how we make them experience how archaeology is done, it gives them the will and the ability to understand more the importance of the scientific side of it, and then it also gives them the capacity to take care of their own heritage. So meron na silang knowledge part, and then na-realize nila na, I can actually share this with others, and I don't have to be like a scientist or an archaeologist to be able to participate in heritage activities. So we also applied this approach to other communities or LGUs in the Philippines. So on the 2 rock shelters in Ilan Island in San Jose Occidental, Mindoro. We did it also with the Tourism Office and Museum of Tuguegarao City, Cagayan Valley. And on the 19th century kiln site and in Ilian Hill Archaeological Site in Alubid, Misamis Oriental. And we really hope to fine-tune the experiential aspect and the heritage interpretation principles, so that more LGUs and more communities can be involved. And you can learn more about what I just shared in here. We can send the link later. So yun lang. Thank you.
Yay! Thank you, Tasha, for that, for sharing your experience in San Juan, Batangas. And I think we've already put some questions in our chat group. But maybe bago natin isabihin yung mga yon, I think my question for everyone is, how did you get to start about this heritage interpretation? Parang kasi it's I don't know if it's a new concept or something that you just parang discovered along the way, along your profession. So how did you come up with this, or paano nyo naisip na we have to frame it on this level?
Okay. Bilang feeling ko ako yung pinaka-recent na naka-discover, can I go first? Kasi ako,
Yes.
honestly, super recent discovery lang siya for me. I mean, of course, in archaeology, not all, I'm sorry, but not all professors really advocate for public archaeology or the push for locals to be a little bit more involved in our work, because normally we hire them as labor to help us in the manual labor of excavating, for example, 3 meters below the surface. And I was looking for something more meaningful than just being hired laborers, than just presenting to them data after an excavation, more than just including them in everyday discussions after we excavate in the site. I kind of wondered how we could be more, yung mas may longer and a deeper effect with the community, so that when we leave after an excavation season, nandyan pa rin yung connection and nandyan pa rin yung relationship. And then I was just looking on the internet, and I found heritage interpretation. And then I joined the workshop, and gladly I got certified as a personal interpreter. Yay! So nahanap ko lang siya in 2017, and then it inspired me to make it a PhD research in the Philippines. Yun lang siya.
Thank you, Tash. Okay, si Sir Boboy or Cara, how did you get into this whole heritage interpretation thing?
Well, of course, when you do community-based tourism, number one objective is really conservation. It's always paramount, conservation. Second is leisure. So when you say conservation, it should involve behavior change after the visitor has left the destination, meaning he or she should have love or developed stewardship for the environment. And before you can love something or the environment, you have to know about that particular thing or about the environment. But before you know, you have to learn. And who's the best person to give the information in the community during a visit are the local guides, because they know the place like the back of their hands.
Yeah.
So that's why it's really important. Number one, for conservation. Number two, for education, memorable and meaningful experience for them. And of course, there's the economic side to it. If you employ the locals as heritage interpreters, they get income out of it, So it's sustainable because you have economic, you have the conservation aspect, and you have the people, involvement of the community.
Yes, Cara.
Ako naman, I just fell into it because I was told by my boss when I was working overseas to write the interpretation plan. And I thought, what is that? So that's how I got into it. And then as I was doing it, fortunately, I had a mentor who was guiding me through it. But I think what I took away from that experience was the realization, I think this was 2006, that pinag-iisipan pala to, how to present.
Hindi lang siya yung, this is the ganyan, this is the ganyan.
Yes. Pinag-iisipan pala to. And it always resonated with me why other countries have a great love for their history, for their
Yeah,
culture.
culture. Yeah.
Yeah, why they're proud of their architecture, and why if you go to other countries at 6 years old, the kids are already entering museums. Okay,
Mm-hmm.
it's because they have thought about how to present it in a meaningful and relevant way to 6-year-olds. And when you do that over time, then you have a culture that ends up really loving its country, its identity. And so that's how I got into it. Pinag-iisipan pala ito. Pinaplanuhan pala to.
Mm-mm.
That's how I got into it.
Ang
Yeah,
ganda.
kasi I notice in all of your presentations, the framework is really built on like education, sustainable tourism, community development. But did they nagkaroon ba ng point that there's a like you need to balance the three kasi hindi naman lahat 'di ba would jive into place, especially with some issues on tourism or economic or profit for the
Yeah.
communities. So how do you balance that kind of dichotomy between the frameworks that are being used in this kind of framework?
Um, yeah. Number one is you control your greed. Just kidding. Um, yeah, it's a matter of, when this sounds cliche, but when you talk about sustainability, you have to. There are three cornerstones of sustainability. You have to look at the involvement of the community, and you have to look at, social equity, and you have to look at the wealth or the prosperity created. So it's a kind of a balancing act. But you'll get somehow, no, if you have the involvement of if everything, falls into the right
Place.
place, and by chance, or of course through hard work, um, you'll get there. I mean, it's just really a matter of, tweaking here and there, fine tuning. But of course, you have to the moral compass of sustainable tourism is always been conservation. Whether you like it or not, uh, profit comes next, of course, because in order to sustain your project, your initiative, you have to earn, or you have to spread the wealth. You have to share the prosperity with the local community.
Yeah.
Did
Yeah,
I answer it?
I'd like to
Yeah.
add. Can I add to that?
Yes, sure. Yeah.
Europe has the Faro Convention, which talks about the social benefit of heritage. Okay, the social benefit of heritage and the impacts. And if you look at it in the context of their other conventions, no, they're really guided by this desire. It's difficult, but this conscious desire to balance. I don't know, Sir Bobay, where we are. Are we as conscious about these things? Or
Um,
is it really about self-awareness? Let me moderate my greed situation.
well, it's very hard to answer that, but based on my experience, we still have a long way to go when it comes to educating
Yeah.
Mhm.
educating Filipinos in terms of sustainable tourism,
Mhm.
because what we're doing right now is still mass tourism. Although there are a few sites all over the country who have which have opened to sustainable and ecotourism thing, but still, um, this might sound harsh, but we're still, before the COVID, we still prefer quantity over quality, and that's really embedded in. I'm sorry to say, it's really embedded in the agencies. The concerned agencies. It's still quantity over quality.
Mm-mm.
Yeah.
Eto may tanong, what is the difference daw between heritage conservation and interpretation? Anybody? Anybody? Anybody wants to answer that?
Um,
Yes, go Tash.
I wouldn't. Okay, super. I don't want to go to the technical definition of it kasi hindi ako heritage conservation parang
Person.
person, yeah.
Mm-mm.
And in the Philippines, hindi mo maiwasan na pag sabing heritage conservation nasa built heritage siya, architectural na pag-aayos. But siguro ang pwede ko lang ma-share ang two questions that heritage interpreters should always ask themselves when they try to do an interpretation plan, according to Kara. So when you want to delve into heritage interpretation, so the first question to ask is, when people have an encounter with a heritage site or an object, and when they return to their day-to-day lives or day-to-day businesses, does this heritage site or object become more meaningful to them?
Mhm.
Next question. Do they feel more connected to that heritage site or object? And do they realize that it has to do with their own lives and their own decisions for the future? So these are the two questions that heritage interpreters always have to have an answer to when they create a heritage interpretation plan, or when they create a module that's geared towards heritage interpretation. Baka
I
may
guess
mas,
yeah.
mas may magandang sagot yung iba.
Mhm.
Well, I'll do the same thing. I won't get into the definition of conservation, but basically, it's a communication it's a way of communicating. Interpretation essentially is a method of communication. How you communicate it, whether it is in the form of a tour, panels, retaining the adobe in this part, whether it is, there are many ways of doing it, but it's really a way of interpreting, of communicating the significance of the site or the area. So it's a communication. It's basically a form. It's a form of communication with a specific objective and outcome in mind. And I like that's why I like Sam Ham. He always says it's communication that is thematic, organized, relevant, and entertaining, so as to provoke a person into action.
Or to invoke meaning.
And actually, may nagbe-bring up dun sa audience natin about collective memory. So, parang sinasabi rin na, paano kung wala na yung collective memory ng mga tao? So, is that our role as heritage practitioners and those people in the academe to probably bridge that gap? Paano kung wala na yung collective memory? Or wala na yung history sa kanila? Or do you think we should go into that? Or heritage interpretation is part of that, building that collective, reliving that collective memory again?
Yeah, I would suppose yes. And I think based on my experience again, the academe has a great role in that, because related to that is historical revisionism. And then I mean the schools and universities should correct the truth. I mean they should give out the truth rather than all this revisionism happening in the midst around us. So yeah.
I think also may mga questions then about local engagement in terms of like participation. So how do we really evaluate local participation, or like if we are able to really get the message across through heritage interpretation? And when can we say that we failed also? Kasi there are some instances na, halimbawa, diba sa atin, there are some factual information, gaya nga ng sabi ni Sir Bobay, may factual information that we have to translate or we have to inform the people. But somehow, sometimes, it doesn't really get across, right? So, and maybe they have a different interpretation, or because kulang pa yung context na
Okay.
meron sila, the message gets lost along the way. So how
Yeah,
do we deal with that?
I'd like to answer that in the context of development, community development, the participation. Well, of course, when you talk about participation, you have stakeholders, right?
Yes.
People who have at stake, no, with a particular project or a particular development, and there are actually two types of stakeholders. You have the primary stakeholders, which are really those that have direct stakes in the project or in the development. The second type of stakeholders are those that are they are influential, not they're only influential, but they can also represent, no, the interests of the sector. So how participatory? Well, it's a matter of engagement. If you can engage the stakeholders, especially the primary stakeholders, to manage their resources, as I've shown in my slides, for example, you have to let them participate in, the cultural mapping or the participatory resource assessment. They are able to make good decisions among themselves. They are in control of, the resources. They are in control of the situation. Then I think they are, they are actually participative, or that's what you call participatory. And how do you measure participation among stakeholders? Of course, you have to look at you have to look at the levels of decision making, like how engaged are they when it comes to decision making, or you can actually see how much time they are devoting to a particular project. And in all of my projects, I always emphasize, I'm sure you've heard about the term sweat equity, meaning to say the only contribution they have to the project is their sweat. If you're talking about the project with a tag of about 100,000 pesos coming from a donor, so what will be the equity of the stakeholders when in fact they don't have money? That's why you do a project there. So you solve it through sweat equity, meaning to say you put value or you monetize their contribution, be it time, be it attendance in meetings, or be it the lunch they bring to the meetings, or be it the local materials used in constructing a facility. So I think that's the second one in evaluating participatory, how participative is a community. The third is the degree of ownership, no? Because different stakeholders have different degrees, and this brings us back to the second. If you have, if you understand the concept of sweat equity, and then you will also understand the degree of ownership you will have in a particular project or in a particular business. And then siguro the satisfaction you get, no, from participating. Meron bang mga, are there stakeholders who are grumbling na palagi na lang nagbi-meeting, or these meetings are not getting us anywhere, or that sort of stuff. So it's the satisfaction we get. And related to that is their involvement in a particular, especially in the time when you mobilize the community. How involved are they in the mobilization of a particular, like for example, in cleaning up a river? Do they participate? Are they involved? Or it's just, they just go there and then wala na, no? Or on off yung participation nila. So yun, I think that's based on my experience.
Mm-hmm. So sir, masasabi mo na may mga failed attempts din tayo pag sa mga ganitong or it's not a one-time thing. It's a continuing process.
Yeah, it's a process. No, development is a process. So you will stumble along the way. You for yourself to get up, and then you do again another mile, and then and then you have you learned lessons, and then you apply the lesson. So it's actually a journey, no? So it doesn't mean that it's really a destination. It's a journey where you have ups and downs, you have failures, and you have successes, you have victories, and um, defeats. So it's a matter of mahirap eh. I mean, it's really difficult to.
Speaking of sweat equity, sir, may tanong kung are there any ethical guidelines do we follow in involving communities in their activities in terms of rights or even honoraria, intellectual properties? I mean, in the works that you do, Tash,
Okay.
Kara, and Sir Boboy.
Yeah, as I've mentioned earlier, in ecotourism, sustainable tourism, the moral compass is actually conservation. So everything should go back there, no? So, for example, in terms of let's talk about honoraria or the income from the tourism receipts, no? So, for example, in the Aloginsan project, would you believe that 82% of the income goes to the community, and only 18% goes to the local government? But who's the local government? It's still part of the community, right? So there is no what we call um, leakage in profit, because every cent is accounted for, and every cent is just just is retained in the community. So it creates some sort of a village economy. And you might ask how the communities share the profits, no? So at the end of the day, because rotation yung ano nila eh, interpreters for today is person A, B, C, D, then tomorrow E, F, G, H. So it depends. So at the end of the day, they get their share. And at the end of the month, they also get another share, no? The profit, they share, no? But the profit should come after they've already deducted from the conservation funds, which the community has to take away from the total income. In terms of ano yung iba, rights ba, something like that?
Rights at saka ano daw, sir, intellectual properties.
Well, nothing has really come up about intellectual properties. Although my instance na, I won't mention it na lang, but we were doing cultural mapping, and then somebody tried to, take away the transcriptions of a ritual. In Aloginsan, there's this ritual that is they staged it. I mean, not staged. They do it. They perform it during Catholic funeral wakes. It's like moro moro. It's like free verse. Person A will recite a metric verse, and then impromptu, and then followed by another lady. So gentleman lady. So they do. Para siyang, what you call it in Tagalog, balagtasan ba or something. So these things. So what we did for the first time, we did a video recording of transcription of this ritual. But the local government kept it. So we gave everything to the local government kasi project naman yun nila, di ba? So when it comes to intellectual property rights, I think the local government has to help the community.
What about in your work, Kara and Tash? Kasi
Yeah.
I know also that, diba, when people interpret, of course, we document those responses as well. So how do we deal with intellectual properties or, yeah.
So, in the case of sa aming tahanan in Kawit, the narratives actually are co-written by the actors and Fundación Santiago.
Ah, wow.
Yes,
Okay.
because it was co-written, and we also got another group to help us because they need to embody these characters, and so for them to be able to answer any question under the sun. Diba? They will always be continuously learning.
Yeah.
So
Mm-mm.
the initial narrative was developed by Fundación Santiago, the actors, and it was proofread by the NHCP. So everyone basically had a say what goes on there. We haven't had any issues yet, but as we go along with the questions, especially the question and answer, because that's when we go even deeper into the
Yeah. Uh-oh.
characters. Yeah. So it's a shared right. Yeah. And I think what makes it different is that we've worked with this group for the last 5 years, so we have a
Mm-hmm.
very deep relationship with them already. So nobody wants to steal monologues for some
Yes.
reason.
Ayaw nila.
Well, for me, my participation is in partnership with LGUs or local government offices and the local DepEd teachers or superintendent. So yung local DepEd district, Department of Education district, and the shared participation is how well, before COVID, the plan was to go back and then to go to these specific communities, and then we would together build like a repository of
Mm-hmm.
teaching strategies for each grade level. From K to 12, ideally, we were going to make a repository of teaching strategies and lesson plans based on the learning competencies of each level of grades. And we were going to build this together with the local DepEd teachers. So it was also going to be a shared right, and the idea was for it to be part of the references for future teachers that we're going to be and for any other local government employee.
Yeah. We'll take time to read some of the comments from the page. So from Ed Ibanez, sabi niya, the education factor early on should be adopted in the formative years of a child in school, exposing them on the heritage of their place through local tours for children. In that way, they will be conscious about their history and heritage through participation and exposure. Tas kay Miss Maria Sonico, sabi niya, we must also realize that our economic system impacts our heritage memory. And sabi ni Miss Rina Manalo is, sabi niya, when you sincerely care about heritage and all its aspects, it's no-brainer. It comes naturally that you regard the locals as primary resource and beneficiary of knowledge produced by the endeavor. Yan mga sabi ng mga ilan nating kasama. Actually, may question din dito. So have you ever observed now in your works that there are people exoticizing the sites or the locals that you work with? How do you view this?
Uh, okay. No. As much as the problem with ecotourism promotion is that ecotourism destinations usually happen in beautiful pieces of paradise where
Yeah.
people
Mm-mm.
are poor and people are exploiting resources. I think that's over romanticizing it, over glamorizing it, when in fact it's not the it's not the poor people only who are destroying the environment. I mean, there are also like corporations, no? I mean, plundering the environment. So as much as possible in my project sites, I don't do that. In fact, we don't do othering with tourists. We welcome them, although we treat them as visitors. Meaning to say, we treat them as just the same. So we don't we pay attention to how we portray our women in our promotional materials, in our video, or and in fact, this may sound funny, and this is true. On probably the third year of my project, when the community started earning, the women were now going to the parlors, because they already had much income, so they had their nails cleaned already. And well, I'm not saying they were dirty before, but you know what I mean. They put glossy and colored manicure or something. But that's not authentic, because that's not the way they use. So it became part of our policy that when you're on duty, you have to clean your nails, but no transparent, no glossy thing. Just clean nails, so that you can handle the food safely, serve the drink safely, or it doesn't show. Because in tourism, whether you like it or not, there is also what we call the 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 front stage and the backstage. What happens in the backstage, what happened in the front stage, and that would include the way you make yourself presentable to the visitors, clean, and that sort of thing. So exoticizing, no.
Yeah. I think it also depends on what type of heritage are you presenting to the local communities, because I think this is evident also for intangible heritage, na ganun din yung perspective na communities or indigenous people are being exoticized by some of their traditions and customs, diba?
Yeah, but they're just playing out a role, right? So I mean, just to have embrace authenticity. Yes, that's it.
Cara, you wanna add to that?
No, I have no experience.
Yeah, it's okay.
But actually, no, when
Or
I think about it, yes,
exoticizing, exoticizing a site daw, parang ganun.
exoticizing a site.
A site,
Oh,
is there?
gosh.
Is there such a thing?
Well, I think that for me is that whole focus on the other.
The
Is
other,
the whole
yeah.
problematic. Yeah, if you get stuck there, then how would it relate to me and when I go back home?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think for me, if the objective is to find relevance, then it cannot really be all that exotic. Well, that's what I think.
I think for me, it's not a problem of exoticizing destinations, at least in the Philippine setting. For me, it's like copying.
Okay.
My zip line si Barangay A, my zip line Barangay B.
Kailangan mo.
These things.
Yep.
And then my I love whatever Cebu si my I love naman si site B, no? So
yeah,
I mean, that's the problem, rather than the exoticizing thing.
Yeah. And I think yung related din doon sa sinabi kanina na because a lot of the sites, or like how paradigms are being shifted to the uniqueness of a place, as opposed to yung sinasabi ni Cara kanina, yung shared values and shared heritage that we see, or commonalities among these areas that you find meaning and that you can relate to it. Yun. But actually, meron pa tayong part 2 nitong telling heritage stories on Friday at 10
Can I
a.m.
make a comment lang?
Yeah, go sure. Yeah.
Because I saw a question here, and I think this is quite relevant. The question is reliving the past relevant to the present in appreciating our heritage? And I think it's again going back to that shared thing. When you talk in the language of themes, what are the universal themes that transcend time and space? So something like migration. In archaeology, they migrated to San Juan, I don't know how many thousands of years ago, and yet to this day, you still get a lot of migrants from Calabarzon going to San Juan for work. Okay, so I don't think it's about reliving the past, but it's about finding the common themes that you can relate to. So whether Aguinaldo was a bad kid or a bad president,
Or
he was still a kid at some moment in time, or whether he made a mistake that had severe consequences. I think it's really thinking about heritage experiences in themes regardless of class, culture, race, and that's what it's not reliving the past. Yeah, kasi
Yeah.
again the commonalities
yes.
Can I add also
Yes.
to that?
Go,
Yeah, so
Ash.
Yeah.
maganda, I really like the point of the commonalities, because one of the principles also of heritage interpretation is the relatability and the generation of a general truth, that everybody, for example, who is part of that tour group can relate to. So parang one of the elements in heritage interpretation is to provoke resonance in participants, and which would offer paths to the deeper meaning. So yung pag-provoke ng resonance, it doesn't necessarily have to be reliving the past, but for looking for the relatability and the common features that we can all relate to, so that yung may resonance, magkaroon ng deeper meaning with the site or with the object.
Yes. Actually, magandang point yan. And I think we'll dwell more on that on Friday when we talk about the part 2 of this talk. But before we end, I think maganda yung discussion natin this afternoon, and I hope the viewers were able to catch up a lot of those information that was shared by our speakers. And I think it will still be ongoing in the Nayong Pilipino Foundation Facebook page, so you can view it. But before we end, I'll call on Dr. Laya Bukirin from Nayong Pilipino Foundation to say something.
Thank you so much, Kate. My heartfelt thanks
Yes.
also to our key resource person, Baboy Costa, Cara Garilao, and Natasha Quintanar. Thank you for sharing with our audiences the different strategies for heritage interpretation from the unique set of methodologies offered by your fields of expertise. So the importance of protected areas and marine corridors, basically what we mean by sustainable heritage, for what, whom, and why. Activating data from our fieldwork for participants across ages and ordinary people. I think these are really quite powerful insights we learned. And I really enjoyed reading the questions even on social media. So I would just like to introduce this project that we have, Rhizomatic Interventions. This is our call for digital content, primarily because cyberspace will be our cultural park and creative hub. This was inspired by producing news then. So they do multiple shoots grow out of the soil above the ground over an expanded area, and all of these are interconnected. And this kind of system enables these rhizomes to survive unfavorable seasons and tough environmental conditions. So we use this analogy for the project. And so for this project, we're seeking transdisciplinary collaboration. So for example, a creative, media designer, a video editor can collaborate with an archaeologist, an ethnobotanist, and so on and so forth. So the call, titled as such, welcomes proposals that have the potential to spread across online and offline platforms like rhizomes. And these kinds of content will embody knowledge systems and practices across locales that in turn can also be propagated and sustained elsewhere. So The themes are detailed in a Google Drive that can be accessed through a link that you can click on the pinned post that you will see from the NPF Nayong Pilipino Foundation Facebook. So there's a link there to a Google Drive, and it will bring you to the details that on the themes that you have, such as new solidarities during crisis, saving our sites for ecosystem and human well-being, civic taking stock of our cultural assets, and biodiversity conservation advocacy. So these are the themes, and the details will be on that link that you see there that you can click on in the NPF pinned post. The digital content may be any of these types and purposes. Can we go to the next poster? Thank you, Blessy. So it can be a lecture for educational purposes. It can also be a short documentary if you want. You can have a workshop, how to conduct field work, for example, or a workshop to teach a skill or impart local wisdom, weaving, wood carving, etc. Fields, no, or skills that are specific to certain localities that you have in whatever region or place you belong to. There can also be some performances, music, choreography, theater, storytelling, accompanied, of course, by performance notes. Just check the themes once again and align these performances into any of those themes. And then you can also have advocacy or information campaigns to popularize evidence-based research and policy. So these are the kinds of formats that you can have for these digital contents. And then for dates to remember, just remember that these proposals only, not yet the digital content, proposals only. And there's even a template that you can already use once you click on that link leading you to the Google Drive. So for dates to remember, just think of June 10. June 10, you are to submit the proposal to ang atingnayon@gmail.com. Just the proposal, not yet the digital content. That's it, perhaps. And I would like to invite the audiences watching this webinar right now, this Umpukan, to do look at the details from the Google Drive that you can access through the pinned post that you will see in the NPF social media site in Facebook. All right, back to you, Kate. Thank you very much for this one.
Thank you, Laya. Thank you for that. So please check out Nayong Pilipino's Facebook page for the details of the grant, okay? But, okay, bago tayo mag-end, syempre, we will not end without connecting this to the ongoing pandemic. So, for our speakers, do you think that heritage interpretation can be taught online, and what can be done while movement is restricted? Yes. Can it be done online?
I think it can be done online. I mean, honestly, it was very refreshing for Cara to make a presentation that involved us. And if you look at the Facebook comments, the people watching us on Facebook actually participated as well, and that was really fun. We are on Zoom now, and I just had to look on my Facebook to see, and I think possible siya. It's gonna take some effort, but yun lang, openness to.
Yes.
Kasi ang kasama rin sa interpretation is the audience participation. So kailangan lang siguro natin yun i-fine tune. I don't know.
So
yes, sir, Boboy.
For me right now, I'm using the pandemic as my time to do archival research. I mean, most of the digital libraries around the world are accessible. So what I'm doing right now is I'm doing archival research, which will complement our PRA and cultural mapping in Borawen, Leyte, in my project now at the Mahagna Volcano Natural Park. In fact, I just found out a document, 19th century document about a German traveler, Dr. Theodor Jagor, who in fact went to Mahagna Volcano Natural Park in the 19th century, 1870s. So that's a good way to complement the the primary research we did on the field, complemented with the data we get from archival research. So yeah, I mean, this pandemic has also, brought out a lot of unfinished, businesses to be completed. And online, yes, I definitely believe that interpretation can be taught online, but the primary data gathering should be taught on
Field.
the field
Yeah.
after the pandemic.
Cara?
Yeah, I think I guess I'm going to be the rebel again. Yeah, yeah. I think teaching it is would not be an issue. I think it would be the implementation that would raise the
Mhm.
question, because how will you now measure the impact? How will you now measure the effectivity of your process?
Yeah.
Because nga, the Philippines is very we have so many connectivity issues,
Issues.
and yeah, we have so many connectivity issues, and is it able to reach the people who need to receive this new information? I think that's also my issue. I think learning it, not a problem, but implementing. And I think it would be important, again, when we migrate to online, being very clear about how you design your online interpretive program. I think that is where a lot of the research and the thought and the experimentation would be at.
All right. And I think we were given already by Nayong Filipino a platform and an opportunity to work on that digital content through the Rhizomatic Interventions grant, and I hope that people will really look into that. So again, thank you so much for those who are here right now. But
Thank you.
don't forget, on
Thank you.
Friday, we still have a part 2 of this on translating heritage stories in Philippine archaeology. So we'll bring you to Kiangan, we'll bring you to El Nido, we'll bring you to Intramuros, we'll bring you to Kalinga Rizal, and we'll update you of some of the Philippine archaeological researches here, and see how we can collaborate more and bring this content to alive. Okay? So, it was a great afternoon spending time with you guys. So, thank you so much to everyone. Nayong Pilipinas, salamat sa pagbibigay ng oportunidad na to. We'll see you on Friday. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank
so
you.
much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.